Good afternoon. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. We're here today to discuss measuring whole leadership with the Program Administration Scale. The Program Administration Scale, or PASS, as many of you are probably aware, is part of the Environment Rating Scale family of products published by Teachers College Press. It is designed to measure and improve whole leadership in center-based early childhood programs, and it is the only instrument of its kind to focus on organization-wide administrative issues. Joining us this afternoon are the authors of the PASS third edition. Teri Talan is the Michael W. Lewis Endowed Chair and Senior Policy Advisor at the McCormick Center for Early Childhood Leadership and a professor at the National Louis University. Jill Bella of Bella Mattina provides consultation to local and state initiatives focused on leadership topics in early care and education. Some brief housekeeping before I hand it over to the authors. There is a 20% discount on the PASS available to the attendees of this webinar. You can see it here behind me, and I'll also drop this in the chat so that you can access it when I'm no longer on screen. This webinar is being recorded, and you'll receive that via email when available, so please share that with any colleagues who couldn't join us today. Also, there will be Q&A, so please ask your questions in the chat panel, and our panelists will do their best to get to those. Finally, there is a handout to follow along, so I'll be adding the link to that in the chat in just a moment, so please look out for that and open it up. Finally, if you find this webinar valuable, please visit tcpress.com, check out our upcoming events, join our mailing list. We have lots of valuable books and resources for those working in early childhood contexts. On Wednesday, we'll be hosting another webinar on leading anti-bias early childhood programs. You'll find that on our upcoming events page, and you'll find our mailing list sign up towards the bottom of our homepage. Now, without further ado, please welcome Teri Talan and Jill Bella.
Thank you. And Jill and I are very excited to be here and to be able to share with you some of the exciting updates to the PASS based on measuring whole leadership. So hopefully you some of you have noted to put your name or your role and state and how you're using the PASS in the chat, and we thank you for that information. So Jill, do you want to move to the next slide? All right, and the only thing I want to mention here is this is what our third edition looks like. And so if you're wondering, you know, how we're still in the family of green. And I want to point out that this is 2023 and the PASS was first published in 2004. So we're almost at our 20th year anniversary. Next slide. So our agenda for today, and we don't have a lot of time, so I am going to try really hard to keep it to the most salient points, and know that you can always reach out to Jill or myself for questions that don't get answered today or anything that we've added that could confuse you. So I'm doing our welcome and introductions right now. And if you go to the next slide. So I'd like if people would take a moment to think about why it's important to measure and improve the leadership practices in early care and education programs. So if you could just take a moment and then put your first thought, like just in a chat, it doesn't in the chat function, just so we can get a sense of what you're thinking about why it's important to measure and improve leadership practices in early care and education. So I see the messages are beginning to come in. People are keeping it short and sweet. And as you're looking them over, I'm going to go to our next slide so I can keep us moving. And that is, we've given this a lot of thought over the last almost 20 years. And so first of all, we know from research that there is a positive relationship between the quality of the administrative practices and the quality of the learning environment, children's learning environment in center-based programs. So there has been a wealth of research on this that shows correlation between high quality administrative practices high quality learning environment practices with the environment rating scales. Next point, regularly assessing leadership practices helps promote norms of continuous improvement. And I know everybody on this Zoom call knows the expression about do what, children do what they follow what we do, not what we say as parents. And the same thing is true when we talk about staff. If we want staff to constantly be engaged in quality improvement efforts, we need to show that as administrators, we're doing the same thing. So it's walking the talk of CQI. And then leaders create organizational climate and culture that supports the retention of qualified staff. We are beyond a staffing crisis in our early care and education world, but it isn't all about salaries. It's about having a culture and an organization that people want to commit to. And so the PASS and assessing leadership practices is one way that we can build the kind of climate and culture that retains qualified staff.
Teri, we forgot to mention that the handouts have fill in the blanks. Those were the words that were bolded on the screen. So if you didn't get it, don't worry, I can email everybody those words afterwards. But there are a set of handouts with fill in the blanks to follow along. Yeah,
and we realize not everyone's going to have access to printing it up to do it while we go along, but they're there for you if you are that, want to do that, but they'll be there for you to save it to your own hard drive and be able to get it later if necessary.
And then also, Teri, excuse me, I also wanted to see if Emily can check. There's a few people in the chat who cannot see other people's messages. So I'm not sure. Emily, you can address that behind the scenes. Okay. Looks like you did. Thank you.
Good, thank you. And I like that Robin puts it, leadership isn't only for those in charge. Anyone can be a leader. And with so much turnover in this field, we need more people to lead. And that is so true. And when we talk about whole leadership, we don't say whole leader, we say whole leadership because the understanding is that it's really critical to build that leadership throughout the organization. So thank you, Robin, for calling that out. Okay, so we're going to have a poll and ask you to rate your knowledge of the PASS, any edition in terms of the poll, because this is our third edition and you may not be familiar with the third, but if you're familiar with some of other versions, then we'd like to know that.
I always like this part. It's like watching a horse race here with the numbers, the percentages going up and down. But it looks like we have a wide range, anywhere from a 1 to a 4. And let's see, we've got everybody answered. So let me share the results with everybody. So 18% say no knowledge of the program administration scale, 28% a little knowledge, 28% also with some knowledge, 26% with a good amount of knowledge. So almost equal among those 4 areas, and nobody put a lot of knowledge. So no reliability assessors probably on this call. But thank you for doing that. That really gives us information that we need as we go through today to tell us how much time to spend on different questions. We're also going to do another poll right now. So let me, same number system here, but this time it's about whole leadership. So rate your knowledge of the whole leadership framework. You'll have to excuse me too. I'm getting over a cold, so I may cough occasionally. Okay, we've got about less than 10 people left to answer this question. Okay, so let me go ahead and end the poll and share the results. So a little bit more people with less knowledge of whole leadership than the program administration scale, but still a wide range from 1 to 4 as well. Thanks for doing that. As mentioned, that does give us some information as we move forward and tells us how much time to spend on different things.
So some people are writing that they don't have access to the presentation. It should be, if it's possibly, Emily, if you could respond, that would be great, as to Lisa's concern.
All right. You'll have access to the handouts that follow the presentation, the content of the presentation. So we're going to move on to do a pass overview. And it is, even though since we don't have much time, it's not going to be a very lengthy overview, because we really wanted to focus on how leadership is measured in the past, which was the title of the presentation. But I do want to give people an overview. So the pass was designed for many different purposes, and I'm going to put them all up on the screen here. The first one was for any director or administrator to pick up the tool and use it for self-improvement. It really is pretty self-explanatory as far as general ideas about what to improve and topic areas. Another purpose was for technical assistance, so that people who are out there as coaches or mentors could also use the tool as a resource to help administrators. It's also used for training purposes. And by training, we mean in college courses, as well as we know that many teaching staff members end up becoming administrators in early care and education. And it's a great tool to show them what the necessary components of whole leadership are, and how to measure leadership, and what leadership practices they can be following in their program. So from a training standpoint, it's good for multiple purposes. And also research and evaluation. There are many projects who have used the pass over the years for research projects. It's also embedded into several quality rating and improvement systems, and they can use it to evaluate the programs in those as well. And then public awareness. It's a tool that allows people who are in the field as well as outside of the field to know what's important in leadership in early care and education. When conducting a formal pass, and I also have the BAS up here, which if you're not familiar with it, that's the business administration scale, which is designed for family child care programs, follows the same format as the pass. For a formal assessment, the protocol is to do a brief observation of the program. And during the observation, a person is going through and they're just observing things related to administration. The focus of the pass is on administration and leadership. So you're not necessarily looking at items in the classroom for children. We're focused on items for staff and leadership practices. So that tour takes about 10 to 15 minutes usually. You don't have to go in every classroom, but you do have to go in at least one classroom. And then the interviewer or assessor sits down with the administrator and they conduct an interview, which is very lengthy. That's why this bubble is big. It's about 3 hours long, 2 to 3 hours. And they go through items 1 through 21 in the pass, and there are 25 items. The last items can be conducted looking at documentation. And then there's also a documentation verification process for all of the items that happens after the interview. And that is also a big bubble, as you can see on your screen. And that's because that also takes several hours to do. So it's a full day observation and interview and documentation verification if you're doing a formal assessment using the tool. When it's done as a formal assessment, it is done with one person. So the interview is done with the assessor and then one person who is the administrator. And that person fits the definition that's on the screen. So it's the individual who has primary responsibility, excuse me, for planning, implementing, and evaluating the early childhood program. And the administrator must be located on site if the center has 4 or more classrooms or a total enrollment of 60 or more full-time equivalent children. So titles may vary. You know, this might be somebody who's called an administrator. They might be called a director. They might be called an executive director. They might be called a manager or a coordinator or a principal or something else. but it is the person who has that primary responsibility for those things and fits that definition. So the PASS is broken down into 9 subscales. It used to be 10 in the second edition. We didn't get rid of any items, but we combined some items, and so there's less subscales. So 9 subscales. There are 25 items still. There are 86 indicator strands. Those are rows within each item of indicator quality statements. And then there are 340 indicators of quality. Those are those little paragraph looking statements. They're tinier than a paragraph though, on the page. So each item has 2 pages devoted to it. A notes page that has a lot of detail that will go over some of that, and then a scale page. And so the scale page is called the scale page because you'll notice there is a scale at the top of the page going from 1 to 7. The format of the PASS and the BASS are identical to the environment rating scales tools. This was deliberate because we knew a lot of people were familiar with how to rate and score those tools when the PASS was developed. And so we got permission to use the same format. And so that's how it is. So if you're familiar with how to score the ERS tools, you'll know how to score the PASS and the BASS as well. But conducting it is a little bit different. So you'll notice that each strand increases in quality from the 1 to the 3. So going from inadequate, minimal to the 5 level, which is good, to the 7 level, which is excellent. So each statement, each indicator statement is rated either a no, an N for no, or a Y for yes. And in the ideal situation, as is on this page, you would have all no ratings in the 1 column because the 1 column is inadequate practices. So you don't want to be doing what is considered inadequate. Each strand has a theme to it. So when you're conducting the interview, it makes sense to go from the beginning of the strand and all the way through that strand, and then continue on to the next strand and all the way through it. So this is the first item, hiring and orientation, and it goes through different themes, like I mentioned. If there's a D, it means documentation must be verified. And if there's a little superscript letter, that means that there's a note that goes along with that indicator statement, and you can find that information on the notes page. One of the updates to the PASS, we made a lot more notes and detail, which I think is really helpful for people providing and conducting TA. So now we're going to move on to the whole leadership framework. So go ahead, Teri.
Thank you. Okay, so and this is in your handout, but we have a framework which is printed. And so you see the cover is the image on the left. The meat of our framework is the big box on the right. And we're going to focus in on that next to help with the details about the whole leadership framework. The whole leadership framework is basically looking at the functions within early childhood center-based programs. And it's looking at this from the lens of there being 3 big buckets: pedagogical leadership, administrative leadership, and leadership essentials. And then the circle in the middle is letting us know, but also kind of put on the front burner. And so it's not just like, oh yeah, I know that, but like really front and center, that these domains of leadership are interdependent, and that we'll sort of look at this later and see how the different domains come into play through the PASS and through the kinds of decisions that program administration needs to make and program leaders need to make. So for the moment, I just want you to think about the fact that there's some big ideas in each of these buckets. So the big ideas that are a part of pedagogical leadership is that it's both the instructional leadership, the supporting of teachers in creating the best environment to support children's learning and how we support educators in that work. but it's also family engagement and building on family strengths and promoting the equitable engagement of families to advocate on behalf of their children. When we come to administrative leadership, there's the top two that are kind of internally facing, operational leadership and strategic leadership, but there's two that are outward facing, advocacy leadership and community leadership. All four are big ideas in administrative leadership. Leadership essentials, as you'll see from this image, undergirds pedagogical leadership and administrative leadership. It is the foundational set of competencies. And here our big ideas are three: leadership for continuous quality improvement, or CQI, intrapersonal and interpersonal leadership, and culturally responsive leadership. So those are the big ideas that we're going to look at in a little more detail moving forward. So go to the next slide. And then this is the kind of last page of the whole leadership brochure. And this is going into more detail, taking those three areas and breaking it down into smaller bites of competency areas. It's too small for people to read, but you should be able to read it comfortably when you open up the handout that has been posted for you. Okay. So again, whole leadership is this interdependent relationship that exists among the three leadership domains. And I would say a balanced perspective is necessary when performing leadership functions in early childhood programs. So what does that really mean in practice? A balanced perspective. So we're going to do a little kind of walk through an activity to sort of show you what we mean by that. Go ahead, Jill. So you can see the three domains, and they're like gears, and that when the gears are moving, all of the gears are moving. So that's one visual that can show the interdependent nature, right? Like you can't move one gear without the other. And so they're all touching and come into place. But like, let's look at a specific situation. So that shows this interdependency that I've been talking about. Strategic planning can lead to a change of curriculum. So let's say the center that we're considering here has a process for ongoing strategic planning. And during the strategic planning, they do needs assessment and they talk to the educators on staff and find out what from the ground up, what do our staff think is really important moving forward. And it's been identified that there is an issue with the curriculum. It's stale, it's been in place forever. And then that process, which is clearly an administrative leadership process, the strategic planning process, leads to having to take certain steps. So first, there's professional development planning. So let's say that there's going to be costs involved. So if you're going to change a curriculum, you can't just say, whoop, here it is. Now here's the curriculum. You need to help the teachers, the educators understand about the new curriculum, how to utilize the new curriculum. So in addition, you have to budget for that. You have to budget for the new curriculum, but you have to budget for the professional development planning, and materials and time is a part of the budget, not just the materials themselves. And it could result in needing some of the procedural manuals, like your orientation processes, handbooks, even family communication, to really be updated to reflect this change in curriculum. And finally, I think this is the final bullet on this. Nope, there's one more. Marketing plan and branding. So you want to get the best advantage possible. If you're making this to be a better program and support children in a new way, you want to market it and have branding that shows this and can communicate it to families in the larger community. And then there's the rollout to staff, families, and other stakeholders. So how is that rollout going to happen? All of these things I think you could see fall under administrative leadership, okay? But pedagogical leadership is really involved at the same time. There's the implementation of the PD. And how are teachers supported as they implement the new curriculum? How are they given, permission to mess up occasionally and figure out and reflect on what's going right and what's not going right so they can make it better? So those are pedagogical leadership functions. Then following up with teachers about how it's working in terms of maybe reflective supervision as well as team meetings. Oops, I jumped the gun. So I think you get the drift here, that what seems like at first that it fits under the domain of administrative leadership clearly is very much involving the pedagogical leadership. If the administrative leadership didn't build in budgets for all that PD and all the time and reflective practices, then the success of the change of curriculum is a whole lot less likely to be put into effect if it didn't have all these pieces on the pedagogical leadership side. So hopefully that helps with understanding this interconnectedness of the domains of whole leadership.
And Teri, I would just add, there's also a few blogs actually that we can send you that show this relationship and specific, just like that example, only even more detailed, specific practices that can be done on both the administrative and pedagogical side that demonstrate a change. One has to do with professional development for staff, and then going to workshops and trainings and taking it back and how you support that both administratively and pedagogically. And the other one has to do with family engagement. But I also want to say both of those blogs in our example here today didn't go over leadership essentials and how that's impacted as well, because that's this overarching thing. We should probably create a new slide in the future that shows that. But as you saw those gears, leadership essentials is being impacted. Continuous quality improvement, cultural diversity, attributes of the leader are being instilled into the staff as well.
So now we're going to go to whole leadership in the past three. And I do see that somebody is interested in resources available in Spanish, so we can touch on that at the end. I just don't want to lose that thought. Okay. So here are the refinements that were made in past three that really touch on the whole leadership aspect of past three. So first of all, the first one, the past measures whole leadership in the three domains of administrative practice: leadership essentials, administrative leadership, and pedagogical leadership. That's what we just went over, so you have a little brief understanding of it. And it's right there in the subtitle. So it's even interesting to think about the way the subtitle on this has changed over the three editions. And it used to be measuring leadership and management in early childhood programs, I believe. Now it's measuring whole leadership in early childhood centers. So we're making it very clear this is center-based, and that when we think about administration, pedagogy, and leadership competencies that are essential, we're really talking about whole leadership. So subscales and items have been reorganized to better represent whole leadership functions. And so I think, Jill, just so we can put this up, this is like the list of what we used to have in terms of subscales, titles, and items. So you can, what's in red is what's been changed. So you can see that even the titles of things have been slightly adjusted to better reflect what we're measuring now in terms of whole leadership. So we don't have time to go into everything in detail, but we're going to try to give you a little flavor of this as we move on. So this is what it looks like right now. And you will see that the big changes have to do with probably operations and relational leadership. So we added a new subscale called relational leadership by removing a subscale called technology and building technology into our subscale on operations, because truly the technology really belongs there. And this way we added a subscale that really digs deep into what we think of as the leadership essentials area: meetings and shared decision-making and internal communications. So the competency areas aligned with each of those three domains that I shared briefly with you are addressed in item 22, which has to do with the administrator qualifications. So this item, which we've all had in every edition, the administrator, it's always been item 22. You can see that we have a strand that has to do with college coursework that is based on competencies in administration, and you would know that from going to the notes page. So do we show the notes page? I'm not really sure, Jill. Can't remember. Is our next slide the notes page? Yes. And so you can see here that when you're measuring the coursework credit for qualifying an administrator is well qualified, it's broken down by coursework that's built on the competencies of each of the whole leadership domains. So competencies in leadership essentials, administrative leadership, and pedagogical leadership. And so it helps make this connection in the past three between whole leadership competencies that are found on that framework that you saw, as well as how you would be measuring them in terms of the past three. And this is the qualifications worksheet for the administrator. And again, it lists those specific competencies that are addressed as you're capturing what the program administrator knows and is able to do. So this one is administrative intensity is acknowledged as an element of quality with staffing allocation for pedagogical leadership functions based on the number of classrooms within a center. That's a mouthful, and I just want to break that down a little bit. It is related to a particular item in the past that has to do with the staff. Can go to the next for staffing patterns and scheduling. So it's item 6. I honestly don't know what number it was previously, but in the past 3, it was 6. It's 6. And what you see, and this is definitely new, is that if we're going to say that pedagogical leadership and administrative leadership are the functions of leadership in centers, then we need to make sure that there is time for the administration or other program leaders to perform pedagogical leadership functions. So without too much time, I can't go into too much detail, but at the 1 and the 3 level, it says, I'm going to read it in the positive at the 3 level, if I can see the little print, the administrator or a staff member. So this goes back to building leadership amongst others, in addition to those that have role authority, okay? The administrator or a staff member has dedicated time and identified responsibilities for pedagogical leadership. So this means that in their job description, pedagogical leaderships are identified. It means that if it's a teacher, a lead teacher, or a master teacher who's going to serve pedagogical leadership functions, they're not serving as a teacher in ratio at the time they're providing that pedagogical leadership or instructional support for other teachers. So this, again, is room for a lot more conversation, but it's identifying the importance in structures and processes to support the pedagogical leadership side of whole leadership. And pedagogical leadership refers to the intentional practices of supporting, influencing, or guiding others to improve the quality of teaching and learning, as well as promoting partnerships with families and fostering family leadership in early care and education settings. So you note, the definition is there. It also is the definition that you would find on the whole leadership framework.
Oops. All right. So the next one is that there's a greater emphasis on leadership practices that support inclusion, equity, and cultural and linguistic diversity. So just going to go through some of the places in the past where this was added. It was in some places prior to this as well. The first item having to do with hiring and orientation has a list of practices on the notes pages that people could be doing. They might be doing these, and depending on how many they're doing, that indicates how high up on the scale they get. But one of the ones has to do with the interviewers reflecting the diversity of the children and the families served as well. Another area is in item 3, which is staff development and professional growth at 7.1. Where it says that staff development for all administrative, teaching, and support staff on diversity, equity, and inclusion, for example, anti-bias approaches to teaching, culturally responsive practices, is provided during the orientation and minimally once per year thereafter. So that's a high bar. It's at the excellent level. It's under the number 7. That they should be doing it during orientation. They should be getting that training, and then on an annual basis after that. Excuse me. And item 9 at 5.2, it talks about public relations tools being reviewed to ensure that content is updated and images are inclusive. This can, for some examples of inclusivity, are diverse race, ethnicity, ability, gender, family structure. Whoops, sorry. Item 11, probably makes sense to go to the item page for that first, which I don't see. So this is having to do with screening and identification of children. And it looks at the 7 level, whether or not there are safeguards in place to help identify children and not misidentify them. And so children must be screened in their primary language is one of the things that must happen at that level. And then it includes a list of different specialists as well. Excuse me. Item 12 has to do with assessment in support of learning. So how are teachers assessing children in support of their actual growth and development, their learning? And at the 7 level, at the excellent level, aggregated and disaggregated child assessment results are being utilized by administrative staff in long-range planning and/or program evaluation. And so what does that mean exactly? There's a definition of aggregated and disaggregated assessment results on the notes page. And so aggregated is when you're combining results together and looking for trends and things like that. Disaggregated assessment refers to when data is broken down into components, such as ethnicity, gender, geographic region, language, race. And the purpose of the disaggregated assessment results is to identify any inequitable child outcomes, evaluate practices, and plan for improvements. So at that excellent level, we're really asking people to call out differences and find out, look for trends and see if the data is reflecting differences having to do with those things like gender, geographic region, language, etc. And then hopefully using that information to make a plan to work with that situation. Item 17 is family communications. And we had something similar in the second strand of this item, which has to do with gathering information about the child. But we added some things here. So they're gathering information about the child, the family, and the community. So such as child's strengths, likes, their culture, their extended family, daily routines, child rearing practices, as well as neighborhood supports during that enrollment process and then at other times as well. And then at the excellent level, they're also basing information shared during enrollment and or conferences on their trying to achieve consistency between the home and the center. And so they're making adaptations based on what they're learning about what's happening in the family, right? There may be some traditions that the family has that they're trying to be consistent then in center practices with. On the next strand underneath that, the third strand is highlighted in gray because that strand was already in the past. We didn't change it, but we did add some more examples on the notes page. So you'll see under the letter E, modes of communication may include. There's multiple modes that people are communicating with families. So that's what that indicator strand is about. And what type of modes are they communicating is what this is looking for. And one of the modes is adaptive measures like sign language, telecommunicative devices for the deaf, translation, things like that. Okay. Internal communications, in that third strand, so this is communication with the administrator and the staff members, what's happening internally. This is an entirely new strand. It wasn't in the program administration scale before. It's looking at whether or not the administrator reflects on personal biases. And personal biases are defined on the notes page as beliefs based on one's own lived experience resulting in prejudice or prejudgment, either for or against a position, a person, or a group. So we're just asking them to reflect. Whoops, let me go back to that one. We're asking them to, if they reflect on that. And then at the 5 level, it's asking if the administrator provides opportunities for the staff to reflect on personal biases and discuss how biases influence behavior. So maybe there's some training going on, maybe there's some reflection at a meeting, maybe it's happening one-on-one with staff. And then at the 7 or excellent level, it's having staff review their professional practices from a DEI, a diversity, equity, and inclusive perspective, and implement changes. So they might be looking at the classroom and assessing the materials in the classroom and seeing if they provide enough diversity, equity, or inclusion in activities that they're doing and materials that are available to the children and the families. All right.
I just wanted to interrupt for a moment and say that I was in a meeting and I heard a center director talk about the way they had recently reviewed how they orient and onboard new staff members and looked at the questions that are asked and from the lens of how does it promote a sense of belonging. So if you think of like adding B, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, which people are thinking about, like how do you make a person who's interviewing for a job or has accepted a job and you're onboarding them to make sure that you're not asking them questions or in a way that highlights what they don't know as opposed to their strengths and what they do know. So they actually went back and redid their hiring questions that they had honed over many years to look at it from that perspective and think of even those hiring interviews as being the first step in orienting a new hire to feeling like they belong here. So I just thought that was an example of that highest level at the 7 level, what it might look like in practice.
Thanks for sharing that example, Teri. Another refinement that was made was there was a new focus on leadership routines to provide opportunities for shared decision making and distributed leadership among staff. So we already had some of this in the 2nd edition and the 1st edition, but we built it up a little bit more. So in the 3rd or the 4th strand, sorry, we have job embedded practices. Sorry, that demonstrate professional development for staff happening. And so that's getting at that piece. We also have, and here's some examples of shared decision making and peers taking on a leadership role and the options for staff. Teri, you might have to take over.
Where's your glass of water, Jill? Okay, so I think where Jill is going is that you can see on the notes when we talk about job embedded professional development for teaching staff, it includes as possible practices to consider teaching staff observing one another and providing feedback to each other, teaching staff who share with peers how their teaching practices have been influenced by participating in professional development. So ways in which job embedded professional development is operationalized through the leadership practices that are available to staff. Do you want me to go on, Jill?
I'm going to try, and I realize
Okay.
we're getting really short on time, and there's
Okay.
quite a bit left. So let me try and get us through it. So in meetings and shared decision making, you'll notice again, the gray part was already there. It was involving staff and facilitating meetings and being involved in planning for meetings. We added a part at the bottom about minutes from staff meetings. Go ahead, Teri.
Okay. So we really wanted to be very explicit about what does it mean when we talk about shared decision making. And so what we added that's highlighted at the 5 and 7 level is that the minutes for the staff meetings reflect collaborative or delegated decision making at the 5 level, and at the 7 level, that minutes can demonstrate that both kinds, collaborative and delegated decision making, have been operationalized. And then we have the definition of what we mean by delegated decision and what it means to be collaborative decision making. So that's F and G. Collaborative decision making is when staff define and analyze problems together and decide on a course of action. The final decision is made by either a unanimous vote, majority vote, or a consensus vote. And delegated decision making means the administrator, the person with role authority, isn't even involved in making the decision. The decision is entrusted to either a staff member or a team of staff members to make the decision. So what we're looking for is evidence of very intentional shared decision making practices at the good and the excellent level.
All right, I'm going to try again. So there's new attention placed on technology practices that promote information security. We actually aren't going to go over this. This has to do with administrative leadership a little bit, but it's not really, there's not anything specific that was new to.
Well, we just really wanted to point out that when we were thinking about strengthening whole leadership practices, some of those are administrative, and that this was an area of, which needed strengthening. And so we made that change as well.
Okay. And then the last major refinement was embedded practices that promote continuous quality improvement are measured at both the classroom and the organizational level. And again, there were already things in the first and second edition about this, but we added some new things. So one of the things that we added, and it goes across several items, is this concept of having teachers work in plan, do, study, act cycles. And in this item, assessment and supportive learning, they're using information from assessment to implement plan, do, study, act cycles to continuously improve their practices. And then continuous improvement, it is also happening based on that aggregated and disaggregated data. Hopefully, if you're using data in a program, if you're gathering data in a program, you're then using it to make improvements. Item 16 actually has continuous improvement in the title. The whole item is about continuous improvement. It's about getting staff to evaluate the program. It's about getting teachers to, again, do plan, do, study, act cycles to improve teaching and learning. It's about getting families to evaluate the program as well. Those were already in the past. And then making improvement plans based on the information that's being gathered from staff and families and giving them feedback about what's happening if they're not involved in it already, making sure to give them feedback so they're encouraged to provide more information in the future. And it demonstrates that you really are transparent and you want that feedback to make improvements. Item 1 already had having staff provide written feedback about the orientation in previous editions, but that's another example of continuous improvement. Also evaluating the salary scale for internal and external equity on a regular basis. At annual reviews of things like the risk management plan, annual reviews of public relations materials, this item, those were already in the past. Reviewing the center's mission or vision. So continuous improvement is clearly embedded throughout the program administration scale. We wanted to give people time to ask questions. So we got a little time for that to happen. I know there was a question, Teri, you mentioned earlier about Spanish. I don't know if any other questions have come in yet, but if you have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and type them in now, and we'll get to them.
So while you're putting questions in the chat, I would just say in terms of Spanish, we know this is a pressing need, but we haven't got the pass translated into Spanish. So we wouldn't really have resources for it as of yet, but we really want to make that a priority. And that is something that we're considering. It's not a quick process, and people often ask, could we translate it for you? And the answer to that really has to be no, because we need to make sure that the translation is done by someone who's not just knows the pass, but is a high-level certified pass assessor in Spanish, but in Spanish from multiple regions of the world that speak slightly different Spanish, in order for it to meet the reliability and validity requirements. So we are working on that, and stay tuned.
I would also add, there are a few, like we do offer a training that can be virtual in Spanish as well. It's just an overview training. It's very basic, but that is available through the McCormick Center.
Jill, is it available remotely or only, like, I'm not quite sure if how it's available, but we can find that out. But
yeah, it's available if a group needed it. We've had it done for several groups. So it could be done virtually or in person, actually. And we've also done training where we've had translators for different types of training on the pass that are more extensive than just the overview training. I don't see any more questions, so I'm gonna while we wait in case there are questions, I'm gonna put up this slide here.
Here's a question, though I do see one. Can you talk about the planning cycle and where that originates, or share more about that? Are you thinking about the Plan, Do, Study, Act? I'm thinking that might be what you're talking about. And then there's a question, there are a bunch of questions that are like at the bottom of the list. So in terms of the Plan, Do, Study Act, that is a very well-known process for building continuous quality improvement into all kinds of systems. So I think it originated actually in the health world as a process that involved, observation and reflection and writing down a plan based on what is seen and testing out changes and then coming back and revisiting the plan. So it's literally a cycle, a planning cycle that kind of breaks down the process and makes it very explicit that there are different stages of that process, and that it involves multiple people doing that Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle. And so what we've done is really think about what would that look like in early childhood programs that are wanting to not have quality for the day, but to build quality changes that will stick. What needs to happen? Who needs to be involved? What are the resources? What are the processes and the structures that need to be in place? So a very thoughtful process. So that's what that's about. But you could Google Plan, Do, Study, Act, and you will find a wealth of materials about that. The next question is, how do you become certified to utilize the PASS? So that is a process that's through the McCormick Center for Early Childhood Leadership, that you would need to attend a reliability training and achieve a certain level of reliability on a test at the end of intensive training. And then there's additional stages of becoming certified that have to do with conducting 2 assessments in the field, having those assessments reviewed, and if all meets the standards that are set for certification, then you would be recognized and identified as a certified PASS assessor.
And if you are certified, you're listed on the McCormick Center website. Occasionally people are looking for certified assessors, so that is an option.
And then there's a question about what types of PASS use training is currently being offered and by whom. And so that's a good question. I would say the McCormick Center offers all levels of training. They are licensed to do the reliability training, and they're the only entity that's able to do that. But there's other kinds of training. So there's also training that if you become a certified assessor, that gives you an opportunity and authorization to train providers in the basics of using the program administration scale. So, there's that level of training, and then there's training for technical assistance purposes. And so what we don't have is a train the trainers model, but we do have a lot of different trainings that are available through the McCormick Center, and Jill will tell you about her trainings that she makes available to people, and there probably are other trainings out there that we don't even know about. So Jill, why don't you share a little bit about your trainings?
Thanks, Teri. I also do overview training on the PASS, as well as I have extensive training for coaching for change, specific to the program administration scale, as well as several other administrative tools, and item training. So specific training related to the different items of the PASS that align with the different items of the PASS. I don't do the reliability training. That again is we've turned that over, and Teri and I have designed that training, and the McCormick Center does that training. And then there's a list of resources up on the screen for you. Somebody had asked about that. That's also in the handout. So the addresses are listed in the handout that you have access to. Are any other questions?
And I want to say, like, these just look like a lot of links and you don't know quite what's there. But over the years, Jill and myself and others at the McCormick Center have written a lot of blogs, also research notes that write up the research that's been conducted. I think a really important point about the program administration scale for those who have never used the tool is it has identified that it's met the characteristics of being valid and reliable as a tool to use if it's used reliably. And so it was the first of its kind to measure program administration, and literally before the program administration scale was in existence, no one had a way of knowing whether or not leadership or management or whole leadership really mattered when it came to achieving positive outcomes for children, families, or staff. So it's a really important thing to look at the research and see how it's being used. And that's where you see under resources, McCormick Center.nl.edu library. The library at McCormick Center has lots of articles and research resources that can help fill in the gaps of your knowledge about the past. So I just really wanted to say that. There's just a lot out there.
I was going to add to, I have a special PASS resources page on my website. So if you go to PASS resources, it's by item. It starts out by item and gives blogs written on it, but then it also has some of the worksheets and things that are in the past that are available to people as well. All right, I think we're out of time, but did you have something else to add, Teri, before
It's just, I see another question about the priority of getting it translated. And I think that, I can't really answer that because it's an expensive process and a time-consuming process. So it is a priority. If, there's somebody who wants to help fund this opportunity, we're open to it.
There's another question that I want to get to too, which is somebody asked about what about family child care programs who have staff? There is the business administration scale that is specifically designed for family child care programs, but just a little history. The past, when we were going out and doing training on the past, when it was first developed, we had family child care providers asking if they could sit in on the trainings because they heard about the tool. They knew it had to do with leadership. They're leaders too. And so they wanted to hear about it. And it was them who it really said it would be great to have a tool specific for family child care providers. And that's kind of how the BAS was born. So the BAS, but what I'm getting at is a family child care provider could look through the past and get other ideas. They're not identical tools. So there are ideas and practices that are in the past that aren't going to be in the BAS that could be helpful for them as well.
And the BAS is in Spanish. So for those of you who are interested in that, it is also in Spanish. So thank you.
I think Teachers College Press.
And thank you to Emily, who added the site for the business administration scale. And we're just really happy to answer questions that come to mind later. And thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you all.